Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. My name is John Carey and I'm the project manager of a new EU Life project called Corncrake Life, which has a very convenient title because it's about corncrake. Tonight I'd like to talk to you about, just to give you a bit of an overview, I give you a bit of an introduction to the corncrake, which is a species that for some people certainly doesn't need an introduction, but it's a species that's also been lost to an entire generation of Irish people. I'd like to talk about its biology and its ecology to set the scene. Then I'll go into its current status, have a look at ongoing conservation actions, give you a bit of an overview of the Corncrake LIFE project, which has just started, and then a brief summary. So, Sinead an Tréanach, this is the corncrake. It's an iconic species in Ireland. It would be very, very well known. I mean, such was the ubiquity of the corncrake across Ireland that my own father, who lives in a small village in Sligo, described it, and I quote, he said, there was whales of them around the place. There was so many that you could see them running around the local graveyard. Now, mind you, that was 60 years ago, and things have certainly changed since. And I think possibly that it was that ubiquity and the timing of their demise and their decline that it became a great thing of sadness in Ireland, and their loss has been lamented by many, many people, especially of a certain vintage. So the corncrake is a bird that is little seen, and indeed I seen someone online the other day that remarked that they didn't think that the corncrake flew. Well, the corncrake certainly does fly. It is a sub-Saharan migrant. And this wonderful photograph I actually got hold of today, it shows the corncrake in flight, and you can see it's got these wonderful long chestnut-coloured wings that kind of give a clue to its long-distance migratory habit. Biologically and ecologically speaking, it's actually quite a fascinating creature. It's about the size of a blackbird. It's not the size of a hen pheasant, like many people remark. It's actually significantly smaller than that, and it's more closely related to moorhens and coots and rails. In fact, it belongs to the Rallidae family, and the corncrake is actually known as the land rail in many other countries. Its overwintering behaviour, like I said, it's a sub-Saharan migrant, so it leaves Ireland in the autumn and moves into sub-Saharan Africa. And its breeding range, if you have a look here, the area in green is the corncrake's breeding range in Europe and Eurasia. And for a long time, the corncrake was red listed. It was considered an endangered species until someone went out into Eastern Europe and into the steppe region of Eurasia and found a couple of million of them. And then they realized, well, it's not quite that endangered. So it was taken off the IUCN list. But in Western Europe, the bird is seriously endangered. Its number has declined so drastically. If you look at the wintering range in dark blue there, you can see most of the birds overwinter down in Southeast Africa in kind of taking advantage of the savanna and grassland biomes that you find down there. But you'll also notice there's a couple of blue dots on the western part of sub-Saharan Africa. So there's records of birds from Angola and the Congo. And this is actually very, very important in our story of the corncrake because back in 2011, about 50 Scottish birds were geotagged on the Isle of Carey. And when 6 of them were recovered, what they discovered was the Scottish birds actually spent the winter not in Southeast Africa at all, but down in the Congo, down in the western plains of the Congo. And I mean, if you stand on Malin Head of a summer's evening and you're listening to a corncrake, you can look across and you can see Islay just over the water. So the Scottish birds and the Irish birds, it's a fair bet that we're talking about a bit of a meta-population here. They're very, very close to one another. So bears the question, do our own Irish birds go down into the Congo every winter, which is fascinating in itself because this could be a very distinct population. So, to understand the challenge facing the corncrake, to understand its demise and understand the challenge ahead in terms of its conservation, you have to understand its life cycle and its ecology. The birds arrive back in Ireland. Now, dates can vary by up to about 3 weeks, depending on environmental and external factors. But the first clutch is usually laid around mid-May. Now, at this stage, when the birds arrive back, they preferentially seek out patches of what we refer to as early cover. And early cover is characterized by herbaceous canopy-forming plants like nettles and cow parsley and yellow iris and canary wheatgrass and a few others. So the male, he calls all night with his very distinctive call. He attracts the females in. He might prepare several nests, but the female only chooses one. And in it, she lays 8 to 12 eggs. And those eggs are laid one a day. And when she's finished laying, she begins her incubation. And the incubation lasts about 16 to 19 days. And the eggs all hatch synchronously. So even though they're laid on different days, they hatch synchronously. And this is a fairly typical strategy for short-lived birds, because the corncrake only lives for 3 or 4 years in the wild. And they have a very high attrition rate. I mean, this is a bird that travels 14,000 kilometers a year. It nests on the ground. It's the size of a blackbird. So their attrition rate is fairly high. So when the chicks hatch, the mother cares for them for about 10 days, and then they become independent. They're very, very precocial. And those independent chicks go off and do their own thing. Here's the chicks. They're just these gorgeous little dark balls of fluff, the perfect size for eating if you're a corvid or a fox. And that's another issue that the corncrake faces. But after 44 days post-hatching, these birds are independent, they're fully fledged, and they depart and go back to sub-Saharan Africa. But our story doesn't end there, because the corncrake is a double-brooded species. The female then lays a second clutch of eggs, and this time she preferentially moves from herbaceous early cover into meadows, into nice pastures and meadows with long vegetation over 20 centimeters long. This provides the animal with cover, with forage. Now, she lays this second clutch of eggs. It goes through the same process. She cares for the chicks slightly longer on the second brood, and then they depart. They're ready to go. They're independent and ready to go by the end of August into September. Now, the third and final part of the life cycle of the bird at this point, and we're talking about the female because the male is effectively a sperm donor, she has to undergo her molt. And when she's doing that, she's extremely vulnerable because she cannot fly. Now, if you look at the spread of the bird's breeding cycle there, it's quite long. And this is its ecological niche, is to try and get 20 chicks away to fulfill the population requirement. Now, traditionally in Ireland, the meadows would have been managed late in the summer. And that would have been done manually using scythes and everything else. And then it moved into more mechanical means. And as soon as we went into mechanical harvesting of hay, the corncrake population began to decline, slowly at first, but then as we increased mechanization, as we increased intensity, that sped up dramatically. And the other thing we're very, very good at in Ireland is grassland management. We have scienced the hell out of grassland management to the point now where grass is being saved for forage in early May. So the overlap between the pressure on the corncrake's habitat and its need to breed is absolutely immense. So if we take this and we break it down and we think about this shift in agricultural activity that has happened in the last 50 or 60 years, particularly since the 70s, we've seen a shift away from traditional farming practices that might have been mixed farming, where you would have had hay meadows, pasture, a bit of tillage ground, a bit of horticulture, mixed activities on a small scale on everyone's farm. And that shifted then in two directions. One was to increased intensification, especially intensification of grassland management towards silage production, but also towards very intensive grazing. And that was, it's worked, as you know, the fields are worked right up to the very, very edge. That leaves very, very little space for wildlife, and particularly for a bird like corncrake. But on the other hand, you had socioeconomic pressures as well. And a lot of the corncrake's traditional sites, especially on the west coast, like the islands, they were depopulated. People left them to move to the mainlands. So those island systems, island agricultural systems, which are the real kind of rundale systems, were abandoned. And you ended up with massive mats of rank grassland, which if you're a grassland bird that nests on the ground, is not much good to you. So when you take these factors and you look at them then very objectively, what you've had for a species like the corncrake is direct loss of optimal habitat, coupled to this overall landscape simplification. That is bad news when those two things are beginning to accumulate together. What that leads to then is this effect of ecological traps, where the birds end up seeking out preferential habitat, but that habitat is of very, very poor quality. What goes with that is more stochastic pressures. It makes the birds more vulnerable to external factors, such as extreme weather events, predation, just to name two. What does this culminate in? It culminates into a species literally and figuratively on the edge. The corncrake has been driven out of Ireland almost entirely and pushed out into its current distribution on the west and northwest coast, remembering that this was a bird that would have been found in most fields across Ireland 60 years ago. So what is the current status? Well, as you can imagine, it's not good. Back in 1968, there was an estimated about 4,000 calling male corncrakes. There could have been a lot more than that. It wasn't the most accurate census that was done. By 1978, that had dropped to about 1,500. By 88, we had less than 1,000. By 98, we were down to about 150. And since 1998, the birds have reached this nadir. They have bottomed out, and they've been in that ever since. The reason they haven't gone extinct as a breeding species is probably down to a combination of this species' actual resilience and the conservation efforts that have been put in place. But overall, the current status is this bird is in decline. It's a priority species for under the Birds Directive. It's seen a population loss of 90% since 1978, a range contraction of 93%, and the population estimate for the last 5 years is between 150 to 160, based on calling males, because it's an elusive species, so the calling male is a proxy. You've also seen this dramatic shift in the species range. I mean, a 93% shift. Now, in 1993, the Shannon Callows was the hub for corncrake in Ireland. There were 88 calling male birds recorded in the Callows in 1993. In the Moy catchment in Mayo, there was 24 calling males recorded. If we fast forward now to the distribution over the past sort of 10 years, the Moy population, that went extinct in 1999. That was extirpated. The last bird was heard calling there in 1999. And in the Shannon Callows, the former stronghold, the birds are now extirpated as well. There are no birds left in the Callows since 2015, which is extremely tragic. That little purple dot you can see there, I live about 2 kilometers from where that bird was heard calling in 2011. And as I look out my office window during the day and I see the Callows below me at Kilglasslough, it's just really, really sad to think that Callows should be a cacophony of sound during the summer, and there's nothing in it. So what kind of conservation actions have been in place over the years? Well, if we focus on the ones that are there currently, there is a dedicated action for corncrake within the current GLAS scheme that farmers can apply for. And it focuses on things such as delayed mowing, early and late cover for the birds, which is crucial to their life cycle, and sward height. Birds need long sward. They need grass and cover that's about 20 centimeters long. And GLAS hasn't been very successful. We don't need to go into the details of it, but only about 10% of the GLAS parcels have corncrake associated with it. Another player in the game currently is that there's an annual corncrake conservation program that's carried out by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Now, this focuses on undertaking the national census of corncrake across the country. But the field workers who undertake that census also have a mandate to offer a grant scheme to farmers to mow corncrake friendly, which means to mow from the centre out rather than from the centre in. Mowing from the centre out allows the birds to escape into cover. They also work to ask landowners to delay their cutting to later in the season, and there's payments associated with that. The annual scheme as well, they try and maintain some areas of early and late cover, and there's an element of predator control that goes with it. The other main corncrake conservation action is the MPWS Agroecology Unit have a targeted farm plan scheme for corncrake. It focuses on the development of species-rich grassland, on late mowing, and really high-quality early and late cover creation. One of its great successes is the fact that it focuses on regular advisory. The planners have constant contact with the farmers, and there's a lot of ecological input then. However, all of these schemes and plans, they have limitations. They're limited by the targeting, they're limited by scale, and they're limited by capacity. So enter stage left, a new project, the Corncrake LIFE Project, which is on the back of a real pressing need to try and have a coordinated approach to corncrake conservation throughout Ireland. The project received funding at the end of 2019. Was supposed to start in 2020, but there was various hold-ups, and then COVID hit town. So we're now starting in January 2021. The project's title is also its main objective, which is to improve corncrake conservation status in Ireland by the enhancement of the SPA network and the surrounding farmland. That is crucial. The surrounding farmland to the SPA network is crucial. Our working title is Corncrake LIFE or Trainach LIFE. It has a budget of 5.9 million, will run for 5 years. 4.3 million of this is an EU contribution, and the rest of it is coming from the project beneficiaries. The coordinating beneficiary is the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage via the MPWS, and the associate beneficiaries are the Department of Ag, Photo Wildlife Park, GMIT and Údarás na Gaeltachta. The project scope, it will operate across 8 areas, and these 8 project sites encompass 9 of the corncrake special protection areas in Ireland. And there are 10 corncrake SPAs in Ireland. Number 10 is the Shannon Callows. The Callows is not included in the project footprint. The overall operational area is about just under 4,500 hectares. The adjacent supporting farmland is crucial and will be part of the project's footprint because together with the SPA it supports 85 if not 90% of the current corncrake population. And these areas we refer to them as corncrake catchments. The project's targets are to try and get about 1,000 hectares under high quality corncrake management. And 95% of that will either be through management agreements via a results-based agri-environmental payment scheme or under lease. And we also have a provision there for about 5% strategic land purchases to build really, really good core areas for the birds. We want to create at least 50 hectares of early and late cover because there's a paucity of that across the corncrake catchments. And while not an objective of the project, we do have an ambition to try and increase the population by about 20% based on the 28 baseline. So that'd be about to get 177 calling males. So what are the project actions? The first and foremost one is support. You'll never have a conservation project without support from local landowners, local farmers, and the local community. For that reason that we have actually 2 community engagement officers working on the project. Knowledge exchange is crucial because the same as for curlew or for hen harrier, to manage for corncrakes, there's specialised knowledge needed, and that knowledge needs to be exchanged with landowners and farmers, and indeed with the local community, because a lot of those people will be able to contribute to the management. The concrete conservation actions that will be targeted on active lands, and by active lands I mean lands that are actively farmed. What we need to do there is create more early and late cover, like you can see in this photograph, strips of it. What we need to also promote is extend corncrake friendly mowing, make sure it's happening, make sure that people are rewarded and compensated for carrying out corncrake friendly mowing. We also need to encourage increased late season refugia. We need to increase the amount of margins that are left in fields that are cut for silage or for hay.
Sorry, 1 minute, John, please.
Thanks, Porrick. On non-active lands, we need to focus on grassland restoration. There's a lot of rank areas within the catchments. We need to reinstate traditional farming practices and get these grasslands restored. And in terms of complementary actions, we'll be looking at things like thermal imaging, flushing bars fitted to mowers, predation risk management, and there'll be an element of rescue there because at this stage, every single bird counts. Just to focus for a minute now on the results-based payment scheme, we'll be designing and piloting a results-based payment scheme. We've seen 2 examples of it already. Our results-based payment scheme will focus on a whole farm approach rather than cherry picking plots. We need a whole farm approach because farms are enterprises that are managed at a whole farm level. We'll give baseline rewards based on habitat, condition and type. We'll give additional rewards based on corncrake specific actions within plots. And we want our participants to get 10 out of 10. And for them to get 10 out of 10, they will need to be supported financially for certain capital works. When considering any results-based payment scheme, however, our one will be for corncrake, but ultimately it'll be for far more than that. Because if you're managing successfully for corncrake, like the farmer that is managing for corncrake in this particular photograph in Donegal, he is also managing water, because that is an extraction point for the local community. Very intensive grassland all around it. Look at his meadow. He is not nutrifying. He's protecting water. He's protecting broader biodiversity. He's protecting soil. He is sequestering carbon. This is the kind of ambition that RBOPs probably need to get into. We might be focusing on corncrake, but we're delivering a whole range of public goods and services. So in summation, when it comes to the corncrake, huge population loss, huge range contraction, now limited to the west and northwest. This has entirely been driven by habitat loss and change in farming practices. This is a very resilient species. It probably could have gone extinct 30 years ago. The conservation measures needed to protect it are largely identified, and the mechanism to deliver that is now hopefully on its way. Gurmaiha give to everyone. If you want to know more about the project, you can follow us on Twitter for the time being, or you can drop us an email to corncrakelife@chg.gov.ie. Gurmaiha.